This video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. Hello, you beautiful YouTube Tarkovians. My name is Onepeg. This video is about recoil, and mainly why the 5.56 platform doesn't seem to fit anymore. Now, if you're looking for a TLDR, it's basically this. The best bang for your buck AR in the entire game right now for like money spent, rubles spent, is the Scar L. By far, the Scar L. Second would be the MDR. The M4A1 and HK416 do not make sense for money being spent on them based on the damage that 5.56 does at range, which falls off compared to 7.62x39 and 5.45 in most cases. And up close, SMGs just do it better, higher rate of fire, and are more accurate. The HK416 and the M4 are both wildly inaccurate for the amount of recoil control that they really don't have. And the amount of money that you have to dump into them is to the tune of some 400 or 500k rubles just to bring an M4 in line with a 7.62x39 mutant that costs half that much. It just doesn't fit right now compared to other alternatives. This video is going to explain all of that, but I want to get the sponsor out of the way first. So we're going to take care of that, and then I'll get into the rest of the video. This is the part of the video where we have to pay the bills. If you're like me, internet privacy matters to you all. I personally would rather not have people that would, potentially wish me harm, knowing things like my IP address and possibly even dredge up some details about myself and maybe use those pieces of information to help themselves out, so to speak. There are tools that we have available, like VPNs, protecting those things, masking those pieces of information. But if you're going to get something like a VPN, you want to make sure that there's good customer service, of course. You want to make sure that there's a good user interface, make it easy to use. You would prefer that it's fast, right? And you also want it to be rated well. Well, in our case, Surfshark happens to tick all of the boxes on all of those and happens to be one of the least expensive VPNs on the market. Simply by going into the easy-to-use UI, you can simply select a country of your choosing, let's say Malaysia, and in one click, you're connected, and that's it. Boom. As of now, I'm connected to Malaysia, which means that I have an IP address located in that region. If I want to change that, all I have to do is select a different country, and there are a ton of different locations to choose from. Surfshark makes it incredibly easy and incredibly inexpensive. The current best deal that is available from anywhere on the internet is by clicking on the link in the description below and using the code ONEPEG on checkout, which gives you 83% off plus 3 additional months absolutely free. And if that isn't good enough, the license is unlimited. That means that you can use it for yourself, of course. You can also use that same license on any other device for anyone else that you deem appropriate. Your kids, your spouse, your cousins, your grandma, whoever, doesn't matter. An unlimited number of uses. That works out to something just north of about $2 a month. So check out Surfshark, leave a comment, let me know what you think, and a very, very special thank you to Surfshark, who has sponsored me for the last 6 months. Thank you guys. I really, really do appreciate it. Something interesting happened today. Nikita put out a tweet asking people what they wanted to see in the next TarkovTV broadcast, and it met with an interesting response. There was a lot of people that wanted to see a buff to 5.56. Now, I haven't spent an awful lot of time playing with 5.56 ammo. The majority of the time I've spent kind of using a sniper or running around with shotguns, just because that seemed to be a little bit more fun than running around with ARs. But the interesting thing comes in the request for a buff for 5.56. See, historically, the way that 5.56 has always balanced out compared to other calibers is that 5.56 put a lot more rounds downrange than their counterparts. Like if you look at 5.45 with the slower rate of fire, it tended to have higher damage and higher penetration. But the stats of the rifle, even though it had better, ammo stats, always tended to fire slower, at least on the 5.45 side. And then you got 7.62x39. So when 7.62x39 came into the picture, especially with the mutant and some small minor buffs to the base of the weapon system, it started to sing. And then we saw the mutant kind of take over throughout the history of the meta. And now with the advent of 12.12, it seems as though 5.56 has kind of lost its luster. And I kind of wanted to take a look at why. But what's interesting about this is in taking a look at why, something really interesting started to show up with the way that recoil works between a wide variety of weapon systems. And through the course of this video, I kind of want to outline what I think is going on. So all of these guns, all 7 of these weapon systems, all have the exact same amount of vertical recoil. Now, the ergonomics is a little bit different in each case, but it was a little bit more difficult to try and balance so that everything was completely equal. What I found here is that even though I can make all of the vertical recoils the same, the way that that vertical recoil performs is vastly different between weapon systems. Now, I want to just make sure that we're all on the same page. In this case, I don't have any weapon mastering aside from just base level weapon mastery for any of the AR platforms that I'm going to show you guys. I don't have any weapon mastery on anything other than the Remington 700 and almost on the DVL-10. We're not running any risk of recoil control or anything like that, or weapon mastery coming into play with any of the testing that I'm doing. None of the AR platforms that I'm using have any type of recoil control buffs. The base idea with this is a simple one. Basically, we're just going to take each one of these weapons. I'm going to point them at a wall, making sure that we're equidistant from the wall, from each other, using BT rounds or 855A1, which all have roughly the same amount of recoil modification. And through the testing, what I want to show you guys is the difference between something that's rated at 69 vertical recoil on one weapon system is not the same as 69 vertical recoil on another. And this is true for just about every single gun. Okay, so here we are in factory. I'm just going to kind of keep it center line along this plane, this line right here, moving back and forth. We're just going to set up some random bullet patterns, and then we'll move in so that we can take screen caps and compare. What else is interesting about these weapon builds is that at 69 vertical recoil, the horizontal recoil was all within 10 or 20 points of each other. 164, 195, 196, 188, 190. So the recoil should not be all that different between them. First up is the HK416. Obviously, there's a little bit more lateral play there, but you can see the huge jump at 69 vertical. We'll step slightly to the right. Next, we have the RPK. This is also a 69 vertical. So 69 vertical recoil, 196, and our HK was 69, 188. So technically speaking, the RPK should have had more variance left to right and should have climbed just as high, but it didn't. Next, we have the AKM. And this was 69 vertical, 164 horizontal. And again, you can see the clustering. Then moving back to the start, we have the AK-103. The AK-103 is 69, 165, which is very similar to the 69, 164 on the AKM. And here you can see the difference. They're just about identical, with the AKM on the right and the 103 on the left. Next up is a 545 AK, AK-74 standard, right on the center. And then stepping to the right, here we have an M4, 69 vertical, 190 horizontal, 85 ergo. So again, the weapon climb that's associated with 69 vertical recoil on the M4 versus the controllability of an AK-74. And you can see the clustering plain as day here between the two weapon systems. AK-74, 545 on the left, M4 on the right. Now the part of this that is really going to chap your ass is that the M4 build that I've illustrated here costs over 300K worth of parts in order to build and isn't even close to anywhere near the meta builds of an M4 that cost well over 400,000 rubles plus the base weapon. And for a final comparison, we have the Scar L with 69 vertical recoil and 41 ergo. Now here's the interesting thing about the Scar L. On the left, you can see the Scar L clustering, and on the right was our M4. The M4 has 190 horizontal recoil, and the Mark 16, the Scar L, has 208. Technically speaking, the left-right variance on the Scar should be considerably worse than the M4. But as you can see, like, this has nowhere near as much climb. In fact, it's almost got no horizontal recoil whatsoever, whereas the M4 is literally all over the place. And this is only at 20 meters. The real problem here that I can see is that you could have a weapon system where 69 recoil is the equivalent of 30 recoil on a different one, because the weapon climb on this HK is 2 to 3 times worse than the weapon climb on an AKM. And even in the case of its own caliber, this Scar L with 69 vertical recoil and 208 horizontal compared to that of 69 recoil and 190 horizontal recoil M4, this is way more controllable and way more accurate than this will ever hope to be. And I think this is the problem. The numerical values that they're giving us on these stat sheets are not representative of anything. They're somehow relative to some other base stat that's being given to one in particular weapon system. There's no standard unit of measurement. Hey gamers, editor Onepeg here. So there were a few things that the community ended up bringing to my attention as I was live tweeting some of these results out that I wanted to make sure that I addressed. We ended up live firing all of these guns again, and I actually added a handful more based on the community's suggestions. While we were doing this, basically it came out that there doesn't seem to be a correlation between anything. People suggested weight. That seemed like it got debunked. People suggested rate of fire. That seemed like it also got debunked. The only thing that I can suggest that makes sense is that the devs have modified the way that the guns work on an individual basis based on two stats. One is angle of dispersion, which is hidden, which is a distance or an angle, a depth of recoil movement when you fire the gun. And the second is a recapture mechanic called convergence, which is a rate at which the gun returns back to center to recenter the gun before the next round goes off. The higher the convergence number, the better. This is also hidden. And it's on a spreadsheet somewhere on the internet for 12.12, but we have no point of reference for any algorithmic anything. It's just a bunch of values. What we can see is that certain guns have higher angles, certain guns have higher rates of return, and other guns have lower ones. So it would stand to reason that if you have a higher rate of fire weapon, you would need a higher convergence stat in order to bring that gun back to center, which in my opinion is really what Tarkov needs to do. After the gun goes off, the gun needs to kind of return back to where it started from a little bit more readily than what we have right now. If we compare this to weights of guns tying into these kinds of things, there is some issue here. The MDR in this case weighs 1 kilogram more than the SCAR L, which I guess if you were going to look at those two hidden stats would kind of correlate somewhat to it not having maybe as much vertical travel, but it still has wider lateral travel compared to the SCAR L. The SCAR L's modification also only costs 75,000 rubles to get it to this number, versus that of the M4, which in this case costs 335K in order to be able to deck it out to the level that it would compare to a mutant or something maybe possibly close to what the SCAR L did in this case would cost somewhere around 500,000 rubles. So either you could bring in one M4 and all of its expensive ammo, or you could take in a slightly lesser firing rate SCAR L, which would put more rounds on target for significantly less, and you could do that 5 times. If you compare that same rate of fire to the MDR, the SCAR L is still more accurate, even though the SCAR L has a worse lateral recoil stat by about 15 points of lateral recoil. So weight in this case doesn't seem to jive. If we compare the same rate of fire for the SCAR L at 650 to something like an AKM, which has 600, and we compare those two directly, the AKM has a worse spread, even though it has a higher rate of fire than the SCAR L, and the SCAR L is still less expensive to manufacture than the AKM, which still costs somewhere around 150 to 200K in order to deck out to somewhere close to those recoil statistics. Now, there is something to be said about being able to modify those other ARs more so than the SCAR L can be modified. But if you're on some kind of a budget and you want something that's going to perform, it makes sense that using a SCAR L would be your go-to. The problem is that when you're trying to mod out a gun and you say, okay, well, I can get an AKM to 70 recoil or 60 recoil versus getting a SCAR L to 60 recoil, the SCAR L is still going to outperform the AKM, and it fires faster. If we look at something like a mutant, the mutant ends up pushing the limits in terms of what it's actually capable of getting to, because you can't really get much further down the line. You can get it to maybe 55, I think, recoil for the mutant, which would make this a little bit tighter of a spread. But again, in comparing it to a SCAR L, which costs a fifth of what the mutant would cost, again, bang for your buck doesn't make sense. And in the same case of the M4, you need to get an M4 somewhere around 50 recoil or less in order to generate anything clustering closely to that of a mutant. And in that case, you're spending 500,000 rubles. So why? And that's really the moral of the story here. It's not about whether or not the different guns are supposed to perform differently and that the recoil stats are arbitrary or anything else. That's just kind of like a side pot to the main idea here. The main idea being that the base recoils of all of these different weapons have to be heavily modified out in order to statistically, visually, and controllability-wise match that of much lesser expensive alternatives that just, quite frankly, do the job better for the money. That's really it. You could deck out a mutant for slightly less and outperform a 500,000 ruble M4. So why would you bother using an M4? The extra rubles sent down range in the form of ammo don't make up for what the mutant is capable of doing for a bit less. Now, for the money is no object gang, far be it for me to tell you what to do with your rubles. I don't know an awful lot of people that would look at money as no object and then still shy away from using a mutant and use the M4 or an HK416 instead, other than just they really like the gun from like an aesthetic perspective. They just want to use it. That's fine. Play Tarkov however you want. Just looking at how it is pattern-wise, to make an M4 look like a Scar L, not on a stat sheet, because we've already determined that that doesn't make any sense, but to make it look like a Scar L on the wall costs 4 to 5 times more than what a Scar L costs. And to me, that doesn't seem to make an awful lot of sense. I would rather just use 5 raids worth of Scar Ls than burn 500,000 rubles on somebody that hits me in the side of the head with a PM pistol in the ear or something and gets to laugh about how they clapped a streamer. Because we all know that that's how that would happen for me. But even guys that are very, very good at this game, like Trey, Gingy, people that are way, way better than I am, watching those guys play the game, they still have this same opinion. And they don't have the death rates that I do. So if even they, with their lower rate of losing, are still seeing a problem here, maybe there's a problem to be had. Maybe we make the recoil on all of the other gun systems worse to match. I don't know what the answer is. What I can say is that when given a choice on a board, it wouldn't make as much sense to go with a 5.56 HK or M4 versus almost any other AR alternative. That's really the point. Anyway, guys, thanks for coming by. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was informative. I hope I didn't get anything wrong, but if I did, please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one, okay? Peace.